All right, greetings everyone. Welcome to the first part of the video for section 7.1. And yeah, let's just jump right into it. So we're going to start by doing some review of solving equations. And this may not at first seems like it connects to stuff we've been doing in this course, but I promise it will in subsequent videos. So what we're asked to do is use our knowledge from previous math courses to solve these equations. And all the different types of equations we're going to look at in this video will be quadratics. So we're really reviewing different ways to solve quadratic equations. So the first one we see here is 2x squared plus x equals 0. Because this is a quadratic without a constant term and it's set equal to 0 already, we can go about solving this by noticing that both terms here contain an x, so we can factor out an x as a common term. When we do that, we end up with x times 2x plus 1 equals 0. And then because we have two things being multiplied to equal to 0, from there we can set up two equations. So we can say that the first part, x equals 0, and the second part, 2x plus 1 equals 0. Solve each of those. The first one is already solved. We just have x equals 0. If we subtract 1 and divide by 2 on the second one, we end up with x equals negative 1/2. All right. And so that would be our answer there. All right, let's look at the next one. So here, it's a very similar setup. We have x squared minus 5x, so two terms both containing the variable x. But this time it's not set equal to 0, right? We have it set equal to 6 instead. So what can we do with that? Well, we'll start by making this equal to 0. So we'll subtract 6 from both sides. And when we do that, on the left-hand side here, we'll have x squared minus 5x minus 6 equals 0, since there are no like terms. And then we note that the x squared minus 5x minus 6, well, that's something we can factor. And if you recall, the way that we do that is we look for two numbers who will multiply to give us the constant term. So multiply to give us negative 6, and add to give us the coefficient of the middle term. So add to give us negative 5. The two numbers that do that, I do believe, are negative, not negative 3 and negative 2. Cody, come on now. That would be negative 6 and positive 1, because negative 6 times positive 1 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. So therefore, we can write this as x minus 6 times x plus 1 equals 0. And you can double check that if you FOIL this out, this x minus 6 times x plus 1, it will give you the x squared minus 5x minus 6. And then just like the one above, because we have two things being multiplied set equal to 0, the way that we solve this is by taking each piece. So the x minus 6 and the x plus 1, and setting those each equal to 0. When we do that, we end up with x equals 6 and x equals negative 1. And those would be our two answers there. Okay. Alrighty. Let's look at our next set. So in the first one up there, we have now 2x squared minus 1 equals 0. And notice in this problem, we have that term with the x squared, but none of the others have a variable with them. And that might at first make things look like they're going to be a little more complicated. But this actually makes things easier for us, because all we have to do here is isolate the x. So we can do that by starting by adding 1 to both sides of the equal sign. We do that, we'll end up with 2x squared equals, these cancel, positive 1. We then divide by 2 on both sides. So we will end up with x squared equals positive 1/2. And then to solve here, because we have a term being squared, we undo that by taking the square root of both sides. Remember, when we take a square root, we end up with two answers, so a plus or a minus there. And so what this comes out to be then, on the left-hand side there, we'll just have x. On the right-hand side, we have plus or minus square root of 1/2. But recall, when you're taking the square root of a fraction, you can break that up and do the square root of the top. So square root of 1, this has to be a square root. We can do square root of 1 over square root of 2. Should be plus or minus. Square root of 1 is just 1 over root 2. Which, because we now have a radical in the denominator, we can actually rationalize that by multiplying both the top and the bottom by that radical. So multiply by root 2 on the top and root 2 on the bottom. And when we do that, we end up with plus or minus square root of 2 over, and then root 2 times root 2 would just be positive 2 on the bottom. So our answer there ends up being plus or minus root 2 over 2. Okay. All right, and then the final one, I'm going to go ahead and clear out the previous stuff in case I need extra room. So here we have 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 equals 0. And this looks very similar to the second one on the previous slide, except for now we have this 2 as the coefficient of the x squared term. So we can't just factor it the way we factored the previous one. So what are we going to do instead? Well, there are lots of ways to do this because it can be factored. We could use the quadratic formula here. That would be one option. But I'm going to try to factor this. And again, there are lots of different ways to factor this. But I'm going to use a method that I call the AC method. Okay, and here's how this works. I'm going to label the coefficients here as A, B, and C. So positive 2 is A, positive 5 is B, negative 3 is C. We start by doing A times C here off to the side. So we'll do 2 times negative 3, which gives us negative 6. And the next thing I'm going to do is find two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 6, but add to give me this middle term here, the value for B. I think we just saw one a minute ago that was very similar to this. But in this case, I think we could do 6 and negative 1. 6 times negative 1 will give us negative 6, and 6 plus negative 1 will give us positive 5. And then what we're going to do is over here in our equation, we're going to make this 2x squared. And then we're going to take the b term here and divide it into these two numbers over here. So instead of being 5x, we're going to make it now plus 6x minus 1x. And the reason we can do that is because plus 6x minus 1x is the same as positive 5x. We haven't actually changed the value of the equation here. We've just written it differently. And then we still have our minus 3 equals 0. Okay. All right. Now the next thing we'll do with this is take and divide this into kind of two parts. So we're going to put the first two terms together, the 2x squared and the plus 6x. And the second two terms, the minus 1x and the minus 3 together. And we're going to do what is called factor by grouping. And the way that works is we look at the first group. That first group I have underlined there in red, the 2x squared and the 6x. Try to factor something common out of those two, which looks like we can factor out a 2x, which then would give us x plus 3 remaining. Then we look at the second group, the minus 1x and the minus 3. Notice they both have minus 1 in common. If we factor that out of each of those, we again end up with x plus 3. And then if you notice, if we look at our two groups again, the two groups now have something in common, right? They both contain this x plus 3 term. So what that means for us is that we can factor that out of those terms. So what we can do is write that out in the front of our expression. And then because we've taken it out of each term, we write the things that are left together. So the 2x minus 1, and this should be x plus 3, not x plus 1, equals 0. And now we have this factored. So we've written 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 as x plus 3 times 2x minus 1. We again now take each of these pieces here and set it equal to 0. So we'd have x plus 3 equals 0, 2x minus 1 equals 0. We solve each of those. In the first one, we get x equals negative 3. In the second one, we get x equals positive 1/2. And that's it. Now we're done. All right, that's it on this video. Thank you for watching. I would say maybe if you didn't get all of these methods or want to review anyone, it'd be a good video to go back and rewatch some parts of. All right, thanks for watching.